Before we dive into this story, I need you to pause and think. What would you do if the family you trusted most hid a secret that could change your life forever? Stay with me because every detail matters, and by the end, you'll understand why this isn't just a story, it's a warning. And if you want to uncover the truth with me, hit that subscribe button now, like this video, and comment what you think you do in this situation, as if it had been stitched into the lining of my skin. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. The sound of my grandmother's old clock ticked behind the laughter, and yet beneath it all there was a pulse of something unspeakable. I was 16, sitting at the long wooden table in her dining room, watching how everyone pretended to behold. My grandmother's hands, frail yet precise, passed the bread basket, as if that gesture could keep us all from falling apart. But that day, when her eyes met mine, I saw it. The tremor, the truth trembling behind the mask of family peace. For years, every Sunday felt like a ritual arriving at her small yellow house on the corner of Rua Das. Palmeiras, with its peeling green shutters, and the faint grown-ups would talk in low voices about money, about cousins who disappointed someone, about who hadn't shown up to church again. And yet, there was always something left unsaid, something that made my stomach twist. My grandmother called it our family's blessing, but I would come to learn it was more like a curse, one carefully wrapped in lace and silence. That Sunday, when my Aunt Clara spilled her wine, after her face drained of color about what happened for in 78, the room my grandmother quiet. Froze. The only sound was the ticking of that clock. 1, 2, 3 seconds of unbearable truth pressing against our throats. Then, as if rehearsed, my grandmother smiled again and said, "Accidents happen," but I knew something had cracked open. Later that afternoon, while everyone watched TV in the living room, I went out to the backyard. The sunlight slipped through the fig tree, and I noticed the small shed behind the chicken coop lot. As always, I had never been allowed near it. Old junk, Grandma used to say, but curiosity is louder than obedience. I picked up a hairpin from my pocket, the same one I'd stolen from my mother's vanity, and I began to turn it inside the rusty lock. The sound of metal scraping echoed like a confession. When the lock finally clicked, the smell of dust and something faintly sweet lavender, I wanted to run, mold hit but me. I didn't. There were old boxes stacked neatly, each labeled with dates and name, family name, some crossed out, some written in trembling handwriting I recognized from her birthday cards. I knelt and opened one, marked 1978, Jewel. Inside were photographs, black and white, faded, showing people I didn't recognize. Caught my eye. A little boy standing in front of this same house, his smile wide, his hand clutching my grandmother's dress. On the back, written in that same cursive hand, my grandson, gone to school. But my mother was an only child. I froze, the air heavy in my lungs. My fingers trembled as I looked at the other photos, more faces, more children. Some had crosses drawn over them. My heart pounded so loud. Some had notes. I thought someone would hear it. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Maria, her voice was soft but sharp enough to cut through the air. I turned, my grandmother standing there, her face half lit by the sun slicing through the door. She didn't look angry, just tired, ink. She stepped closer, closed the box, and rested her hand over it. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, in the kind of voice you use when you're speaking for a moment to the dead. She didn't move. "He was what your mother could never forgive me for." That sentence, it shattered something inside me. The rest of the family called me for dessert, but the taste of sugar never reached my tongue. The laughter from the living room sounded like ghosts pretending to be alive. And from that day on, I started noticing things I hadn't before. How Grandma's eyes lingered on the empty chair near the window. How every Sunday she placed an extra plate on the table, just in case. And how sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she whispered names I didn't know. That Sunday wasn't just another lunch. It was the moment I understood that in our family, the house didn't just smell of roasted chicken anymore. Of belonging. It smelled of that Sunday of fear. Nothing felt of time standing still. Yet, every weekend, we kept going back, like moths drawn to a light that burned us a little more each time. My grandmother's house became a stage, and we, her family, were the actors trapped inside her play. No one dared to improvise. No one dared to speak the truth. I was 16. My mother would drive us there every Sunday, alive, her hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. Her jaw clenched as she hummed along to the radio just to fill the space between us. "Don't ask questions today," she'd say before we got out of the car. "Your grandmother doesn't like tension." I wanted to ask what tension meant. I wanted to ask who Jewel was. But her eyes, cold and tired, warned me that the answers would cost me something. Inside, I wasn't ready to lose. The performance began as always. Grandma sitting at the head of the table, her rosary glinting under the yellow light. My Aunt Clara drinking too fast, her laughter too loud. My Uncle Paulo pretending to read the newspaper while secretly watching everyone's faces. And me watching the watchers. Every bite, every glance, every forced thank you was a thread in that web of obedience. One afternoon, she was slicing in carrots. 2009, her movements slow but offered precise. To help Grandma. "You always cut too close to your finger," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled faintly. "When you've lived long enough, you learn which pain is worth the risk." The knife's blade caught the light, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, something that wasn't fear, but guilt. I didn't know yet how deep that guilt went. Years passed like that. I went to college in Sao Paulo, trying to escape the ghost of that house, but it followed me. Every phone call from my mother began with "Sunday lunch this week" and ended with "Don't make your grandmother worry." I started saying no, inventing excuses, exams, work, distance, but somehow she always made me feel like a family is all we have, she'd say, and hang up before I could argue. The house was smaller than I remembered. When Grandma fell ill, as if the walls had shrunk with her fading strength. She had cancer, the kind that steals people slowly. My mother took over the house, organized the pills, cooked the soup, managed the visitors. I helped when I could, but every time I entered Grandma's room, she would hold my hand and say, "Promise me you'll keep the Sunday." I didn't understand what she meant. She was no longer the fragile during those months in the car. I watched my mother become someone else, as if keeping Grandma alive was less about love and more about control. Once, late at night, I overheard them arguing. My mother's voice was low but venomous. "You should have told her. She deserves to know." And Grandma, barely audible, said, "Some truths destroy more than lies ever will." That night, pressed my ear against the door. I saw Grandma cry for the first time. Her face came the sound of the glass breaking, tears glistening under the street light, her hands clutching a small silver locket. When she noticed me, she quickly wiped her face. "Go to bed, Maria," she whispered. "It's late." But as I turned away, I caught a glimpse of the locket's photo, two children, a girl and a boy. And behind them, my grandmother. Every time I tried to ask, and my mother would no older than your 10 grandmother made mistakes. I would learn that the boy was then Jewel. She'd add, with that tone that meant the conversation was over, "You're lucky you didn't grow up knowing what we did." That phrase haunted me, because luck was not what I felt. I felt like an heir to a debt I hadn't created. By the time Grandma passed away in 2015, the family my mother stood by the casket, at her hand funeral, resting on the wood. People cried in rehearsed her face sobs. Unreadable. "She did what she had to," she murmured. And I remember thinking, what could someone possibly have to do that would haunt 3 generations? When we went back to the house after, my mother locked herself in Grandma's room. Hours passed. I waited in the hallway, listening. There was no sound, except once a faint sob, followed when she by came the out of the old drawer. Her eyes were swollen, and her hands held that same silver locket. She pressed it into my palm and said, "You'll understand one day." But I never did. Not then. Not until the letter arrived. The letter came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, wrapped in a plain brown envelope with no return address. I was 24, living in a small apartment in Sao Paulo. I had almost convinced myself that the Sundays at Grandma's house deadlines were nothing but that was my world now, like an old dream that fades when the sun rises. But when I saw the shaky handwriting on the envelope, my grandmother's handwriting, I felt the air leave my lungs. She'd been dead for over 2 years. Inside, there were 3 pages, yellowed and uneven, as if they'd been written in pieces. The first line read, it again. "If you're reading this time, it means as your mother broke her promise." My hands mother, trembled, who had given me that locket, who had buried every question with silence, had kept something hidden, even after death itself had stopped the clock. The letter wasn't addressed to me. It began with, "My dear Clara, my aunt." That realization sent a chill through me. Somehow, I had received something meant for someone else. A mistake. Or maybe she wrote not. About the maybe debt the of universe, 1978, tired of our silence, about a promise made in blood and tears. about a child lost but not gone. And then, Clara, if Maria ever asks, tell her the truth. Tell her what I did to keep her safe. I sat there for hours, rereading every word, every stroke of that trembling pen, to keep me safe. Safe from what? From who? I called my mother that night. Then
Did
she
you
said,
ever see a letter
"Where did
from
you find
Grandma?"
It
I
came in the
asked.
mail
Her
today.
silence stretched for
That's
so
not
long.
possible.
I thought the
She
line
whispered.
had gone
That
dead.
letter was destroyed. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't afraid of the silence. You lied to me, I said. All these years. Her voice cracked. You don't understand what was at stake. Then make me understand. But she didn't. She just hung up.
The next
It had
morning,
been years since
I
I'd been
packed a
there.
small
When I
bag
stepped
and
off
took
at
the
the
first
station,
bus back to
the
the
air
old
smelled
town.
of wet earth and nostalgia. The streets were quieter. The bakery, where Grandma used to buy her bread, was gone. Even the church looked smaller. But the yellow house, her house, stood exactly the same. I expected it to be locked, abandoned maybe, but the front door was open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and time. I walked through the rooms,
The rosary
each one
still
an
hung
echo
by the
of
door.
who we used
The clock
to be.
still ticked,
though slower now, as if tired of keeping secrets. And then I saw the small wooden chest on the table. It wasn't there before. My name was written on a folded piece of paper, taped to the lid. For Maria, my breath caught. I opened it slowly. Inside were old letters, photographs, and a single cassette tape. On its label, written in the
so
same
I took
faint
it
cursive,
to the old neighbor,
the truth
Mr.
of Sundays,
Davy,
I
who
didn't
used to
even
fix
own
radios.
a cassette player
His
anymore.
hand
Shook as he placed it in the dusty player on his workbench. This looks ancient, he said, pressing the button. A click, a hiss, then a voice, the voice I hadn't heard in years. My grandmother's. Maria, she said softly, her words quivering. If you're listening to this, then you found what I hid. I did not want you to carry the same burden your mother, and I closed my
but
eyes.
maybe
When I was a
wrong.
young woman, her voice continued. I made a promise to a man I loved and shouldn't have. A man who wasn't your grandfather. Jewel was the price of that sin. He was my son and your mother's brother. I gasped. My chest tightened. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But when he was born, I was forced to make a choice. I told him
your
I
grandfather
sent Jewel
found
away,
out,
but
he
I
said
didn't.
either
I
the
hid
boy
him
disappears
in this
or we
house
all do.
for 5 years, until the day he vanished. Her voice broke. They said it was an accident. But I know what your grandfather did. And your mother, she saw it. I froze. My hands trembled over the tape recorder as her voice faded under static. I told her to forget, she whispered. I told her to live as if he never
Not
existed.
the love I felt,
That was my
but
sin,
the silence
Maria.
I
passed down to her. And now, to you. Forgive me. Then came the click, the end of the tape. For a long time, I didn't move. The rain started again outside, hitting the roof like whispered confessions. I thought of my mother, carrying that truth her entire life, of my grandmother, burying her son and pretending he was never born. and of myself living
I
in the
realized
shadow
then
of a
what
ghost
the
I
letter
didn't
had
know
meant
existed,
by
keeping me safe from the truth, safe from knowing what family really meant. That night, I didn't sleep. The sound of the rain, the ghosts in the walls, the tape still spinning in my head, it was all too much. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the locket my mother had given me years ago. 2 children, a girl and a boy. Jewel and my mother my
It
uncle
was that
no
my
one
blood.
had
But
ever
what
mourned
haunted
him
me
out
most
loud wasn't
no
that
birthday
he had
candles,
existed, no framed photo, no mention in the family stories. He had been erased like a name scratched out of a tombstone. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and clean, the way it feels after confession. I decided to visit the town's archive. If Jewel had lived here, there had to be a record birth certificate. The woman
School
behind the
enrollment,
counter looked at me over
anything.
her glasses when I explained what I was looking for. Jewel Ferreira, born 1978. Rua das Palmeiras. She typed for a while, then frowned. We had a child by that name, she said, but she hesitated. That record was sealed by court order in 1983. Sealed? Why, I can't say, she replied softly. But I can tell you this, he wasn't
She
listed
shook her
as
head.
deceased. Sometimes
Only
children were
transferred
moved to institutions in
the
Sao
word
Paulo
stuck
or
in my
adopted
throat.
under different names. Back then, records weren't clear. I thanked her and left, but my hands were shaking. Jewel hadn't died. He'd been taken. The bus ride back felt endless. My mind replayed every Sunday at Grandma's house the extra plate, the whispered prayers, the way she sometimes never stared at the window as if waiting for someone there all along. That night, I called my Aunt Clara. She was the only one left who might talk. Clara, I said, I found something about Jewel. Silence. Then a shaky breath. You shouldn't have gone digging, Maria. I deserve to know. He was complicated, she said finally. Your grandmother loved him, but love wasn't enough. After your grandfather died in an accident, things changed. Did he? I pressed. Accident? No. She hesitated. She whispered. He took something that didn't belong to him, and someone made sure it never happened again. The line went dead. I drove through the night back to Sao Paulo. The streets blurred through the windshield, and by the time I reached my apartment, I felt like I was being watched. Not paranoia, something else. A sense that the past had eyes, and it had inside found me. Was a single 2 days photograph, grainy. A letter arrived, black and white. No return address. Standing near a church, around 40 years old, eyes dark, unreadable. On the back, written in the same delicate handwriting as the other notes, he remembered. My heart stopped. The man in the photo looked exactly like the boy in the locket, grown up, older, alive. I turned the photo over again. There was a date. I stared at it for a long time. That was 3 years after my grandmother's death. Was it possible? And beneath could the Jewel have survived? A small vanished. He's been another life. For you. If so, why reach out now? That night, I went through every box from Grandma's house, desperate for clues. And that's when I found it, an old postcard tucked inside a Bible. It showed a small chapel near the outskirts of Sorocaba. On the back, one line, Sundays
the chapel
at
stood
6.
on a hill.
I drove there
quiet
the next
and
morning,
almost forgotten, surrounded by dry grass and cracked stone. Inside, the air smelled of wax and dust. Only a few candles flickered near the altar. And then I saw him, sitting in the back row, head bowed, wearing a gray coat. His hair was salt and pepper, his hands rough and familiar. When he lifted his face, I froze. It was him. Then he smiled for a moment, sad
neither
smile
of us
that
spoke.
made my
The
knees
world
weak.
went silent,
You look like
as
her,
if holding
he
its
said.
breath.
His voice was deep, weathered. Like who? I whispered. Your mother. He stood up and walked closer. I could see the scar running along his jawline, the kind that only violence leaves behind. I knew one day someone would come, he said. She promised she'd tell you. Tell me what? That your family didn't bury me. I didn't understand. He reached into his something heavier than anger and handed me a folded newspaper clipping dated 1983. The headline read, "Local businessman avoids prison after private adoption case dismissed." Beneath it, a photo of my grandfather shaking hands with a judge. They sold me, Jewel said quietly, to make the charges disappear. My heart shattered. The world blurred around me. I couldn't breathe. Every time I got close, you ever come your back? Mother sent me away. She said it was better for you not to know me. I did. Better for many times. Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to hate her, to hate them all. But when I saw the pain in his face, I knew hate was useless. It only chained us to the same lie. He took my hand gently. I'm tired of hiding, Maria. You can burn what's left of this story, or you can tell it. But if you tell it, they were never really mine to lose. I swallowed outside. Hard. The bells rang 6 sharp chimes, echoing over the hills. Sunday. Always Sunday. That was the moment everything changed. I know this part is shocking and it only gets deeper. But don't skip a second, because the next revelation will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and betrayal. If you felt the weight of these secrets with me so far, give this video a like, comment your thoughts, and make sure you're subscribed, because the truth we're uncovering isn't over yet. I drove straight from Sorocaba to my mother's house. The steering wheel felt slick beneath my palms, my knuckles white. The photo of Jewel burning a hole in the seat beside me. The city lights blurred into streaks of orange and gray. Every red light felt like a test of my restraint. She was in the garden when I arrived, trimming her roses, as if nothing in the world could touch her peace. The same house I grew up in, neat, cold, perfect. She looked up when she saw me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, before she smiled that same tired, polite smile she'd worn all my life. "Maria," she said softly, "you didn't call. Would you have stepped closer?" Her hand placed the photograph the on silence the table. Between us was heavier than any then back to me. For a second, I saw her composure crack, the tiniest tremor in her lip, the kind that only truth can cause. "Where did you get that?" He found me. Her breath caught. She didn't speak. She didn't deny it either. She just stared at the photo, as if it were a ghost come to collect what it was owed. "You told me he was dead. I
You
said.
looked me in the
My
eye
voice
and lied.
trembling.
She took a slow, deliberate breath. Because it was the only way to keep you safe. Safe from what? From him? From the truth? From everything? She whispered. I laughed bitterly. You think secrets keep people safe? They destroy them. Look at what this did to us. To Grandma. To you. She looked down at her hands, blood from the roses staining her fingers. What does that
You
even
don't
mean?
understand,
Your grandfather.
Maria.
He wasn't
He had
supposed to
enemies,
exist. People who wanted to ruin him. When your grandmother got pregnant with Jewel, it wasn't love. It was blackmail. The man she stopped herself, swallowed hard. He forced her. And when your grandfather found out, he made her choose the family's name or the boy. My chest tightened. So you sold him. Tears welled in her eyes. I was
screamed.
10 years old.
I begged.
I watched
But no
my
one
father
listened.
drag him
Years
away.
later,
In the
when
middle
Jewel
of
came
the night,
back,
I was married. I had you. He wanted to tell you everything, to ruin what was left. I couldn't let him. I couldn't lose you too. Her words were sharp, each one cutting through me like glass. You didn't lose me, Mom. You gave me up before I was even born. You just didn't tell me. For a moment, she didn't move. Then
I
her
did
shoulders
what I
collapsed.
thought was right,
And she sank
sobbed.
into
You
the chair.
think I wanted
Her
this?
face buried
Every
in
time
her
I
hands.
looked
At you, I saw him, the brother I betrayed, the child I never got to save. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "He's alive." Her head snapped up. What? He's alive, Mom? I saw him. He's been waiting for decades. The color drained from her face. No. She covered her
that's not
mouth,
possible.
trembling.
He's in
God.
Sorocaba.
He
truth
showed me
hung
the
between
papers,
us,
like
the
a storm
adoption,
cloud ready
the bribes,
to burst.
everything.
What do you want to do? I asked. She looked up at me, eyes red and hollow. There's nothing to do. The past can't be undone, but it can be faced. She stood, her expression hardening again, the mask returning. You don't understand, Maria. If you open that door, you won't like what's on the other side. I've lived my whole life
Some
in that
things
grave.
are
better left
I
buried.
said
Quietly. I'm done being buried. Her silence was an answer. I turned to leave, but she said my name just once, soft and fragile. Maria. I stopped at the doorway. He's not the only one, she said. I froze. What? There was another child, she whispered. One even your grandmother didn't know about. The world tilted. My heart thundered in my
And
chest.
that's the real
You're
reason
lying.
Jewel came
She
back.
shook her head.
He wasn't
He was
looking
born
for
in
forgiveness.
1981.
He was looking for
They
him.
took him too. I couldn't breathe. The air felt like smoke in my lungs. Another brother. Another secret. Another ghost hiding beneath the Sundays. She reached for me, but I stepped back. You could have told me, I said. You could have told anyone. She closed her eyes. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I spoke the truth. As I drove away, she whispered, I saw her silhouette in the rearview mirror. I left without another word, surrounded by the same roses that had drawn blood from her hand. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just emptiness. That was the day I stopped calling her mother. The drive home that night felt endless. The sky was the color of bruises, heavy with clouds that never broke.
I
didn't
just
turn
drove
on the radio.
mile after
I
mile,
didn't cry,
letting her words echo in my head like a curse. He's not the only one. Another child. Another life swallowed by silence. When I reached my apartment, I sat in the car for almost an hour, staring at the dashboard. My reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, eyes hollow, mouth trembling. The kind of face you only see after the truth finally finds you. And now I thought I of couldn't Jewel's stop eyes wondering when what he said had they traded. I needed answers. The next morning, I called Jewel. He didn't pick up. I tried again. Nothing. I sent a message. We need to talk. It's about the other child. Hours passed. Then my phone rang, but it wasn't his voice, it was a woman's. Is this Maria? Yes, this is Sister Helena. I don't know how to say this. Jewel had a heart attack slipped from my hand. He's gone, clattering to the world floor. Went silent. My body went cold. Gone. After all those years, all the waiting, I had finally found him only to lose him again. I went back to Sorocaba that same day, numb, barely noticing the road. The chapel was empty. A few wilted flowers left near the altar. Sister Helena met me there, a small woman with kind eyes. She held a small envelope. The note read, "He left if this you're reading this," she said, "it means softly, I didn't make inside. It. Don't believe there was everything your mother says, and a faded there's photograph. Truth even she doesn't know. His name was Raphael. 1981. They said he died in the hospital, but I found the records they changed. Someone paid for a false death certificate. Find Father Augusto. He knows. I traced the photograph with my fingers. 2 boys this time, Jewel. Maybe 6. On the back, holding written a toddler. Faintly, both my smiling. My sunlight hitting Raphael. Their faces. I found Father Augusto in a retirement home 2 towns away. He was in his 80s, his memory sharp, his voice trembling with guilt. When I showed him the photo, he closed his eyes and whispered, I prayed this would never resurface. I leaned forward. Please, Father, I need to know who Raphael was. She said her daughter was pregnant, your mother, but your the man responsible came to me wasn't her in husband. 1981. She begged me to keep it quiet. When the child was born, he was taken by a family from Sao Paulo, a couple who couldn't have children. I was told to mark him as stillborn. I felt my heart stop. You're saying my mother had a child before me? He nodded slowly. Yes, and if I'm right, that boy would be 44 today. My mother had always said she was 20 when she had me, but the math didn't fit. None of it did. Who adopted him? I asked. He hesitated. I can't say their names. They were powerful people, dangerous. But I remember the father's company Ferraz. My stomach turned. I knew that name. It was the same company that had funded my grandfather's charitable projects back in the 1980s. The retirement home. I'd seen my logo in old photos. Raphael wasn't painted just on some boxes in the shed. He was one of Grandma's house. Another pawn in whatever bargain had bound this family for decades. That night, I opened the box of documents from Grandma's house again. I went through every photo, every letter, until I found one I had missed before, an envelope addressed to Dr. Ferraz, Inside was a receipt. The paper fluttered to the floor like an accusation. I realized then July what my grandmother's blessing really was a currency. Every Sunday we'd sat together. Every prayer, every forced smile was built on the bones of children they'd bought and sold to protect their reputation. And then something even darker occurred to me. If Raphael was born in 1981, and I was born in 1983, then who exactly was my father? I didn't sleep that night. Flicker like distant stars, feeling the weight of every lie pressed down on my chest. My entire life suddenly felt like someone else's story. My mother's words, my grandmother's prayers, they weren't protection. They were camouflage. And now, the more I uncovered, the more I realized the truth wasn't just about what they'd done. It was about who I really was. The next morning, my body was trembling. I woke up before my mind even in my mouth to why. I had dreamed of my grandmother again, her sitting in that chair by the window, whispering something over and over. Don't ask what you already know, but I couldn't stop asking. I drove to the city records office, the same building where my grandmother had once worked as a notary. The air smelled of old paper and disinfectant, that strange perfume the clerk, of bureaucracy. A woman with tired eyes my birth typed certificate. My name and frowned. There's more than one entry, she said. My throat tightened. What do you mean? One is dated 1983, the other 1985. Different registrars, different hospitals. I asked her to print both. When the papers slid across the counter, I felt the world. The first document was the one our new hospital Santa Only Rita. A note. 1983, transferred from rural clinic, Helena, Sorocaba, and Roberto, 1985. But the second one, I stared listed at the word, no parents. Foundling, abandoned. My voice came out as a whisper. This isn't possible. She shrugged gently, as if she'd seen 100 ghosts like me. Sometimes families correct records. Happens all the time in Old Town. Correct records. That was one way to... I drove to Sorocaba again, my mind replaying every Sunday I had ever spent at that house, the smell of lavender, the sound of the clock ticking, the careful way my mother never let me near the attic. It wasn't nostalgia anymore. It was evidence. The attic door was locked, of course. It always had been. But the key wasn't hard to find. It hung behind the photo of St. Anthony in the hallway. Inside, old clothes, the air was thick with dust, and furniture covered in sheets, boxes, and then everywhere. I found the chest, the same kind that used to sit at the foot of Grandma's bed. It was small, dark wood, the lock broken. Inside were hospital bracelets, tiny, yellowed with time. One said Rafael Almeida. The other said Maria, temporary ID number 47. Next to them, there was a photograph I had never seen before. The handwriting on my the back made my stomach younger twist. Than I'd ever known July her, 1983, holding a newborn baby for the records. But the face in her arms wasn't mine. I fell to my knees. My hands shook as I dug deeper, finding another letter, one addressed to Helena, from the Sisters of St. Clara Hospital. It read, "We understand your decision and will keep your secret as agreed. The girl will be registered under your
As
mother's
for
name
your firstborn,
until adoption
the arrangement
is
with the
finalized.
Ferrers family remains confidential. May God forgive us all. My vision blurred. My hands were slick with sweat. The girl, registered under your mother's name. That girl was me. I wasn't Helena's daughter. I was her sister's child, the illegitimate one she had protected by pretending to adopt. My entire life had been an illusion carefully crafted for a erase the scandal. I couldn't My breathe. Mother was actually my aunt. My grandmother, my real mother. Dust rained down like ash. I could almost hear their voices downstairs. Those Sunday conversations, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the way they'd always said, family is family, no matter what blood runs through it. Now I understood what they meant. I sat there for hours, the sun setting behind the window. My heart leapt, turning the dust when I into floating embers. It was again my Sister phone buzzed Jewel's Maria. Number. I found something else in Jewel's belonging, she said. A letter addressed to your grandmother from a man named Ferraz. It was dated 1982. It says, "Thank you for fulfilling your part of the promise. The children are safe, and the debt is settled." Children. Plural. I whispered, "There was a deal." "Yes," I said softly, to the cemetery, and I think you were part of it. To my grandmother's grave. The next hours were a blur. I stood there, shaking, the wind cold on my skin. "Why?" I said out loud. "Why build a family on lies? Why trade us like debt?" And then I remembered her favorite saying, something she used to repeat when I was a child. Some truths don't set you free. They bury you slower. Now I finally understood what she meant. I wasn't just the keeper of their secret like anymore. I could fall through I was the any second. And yet, somewhere inside the wreckage of that realization, a strange calm began to form, not peace, but purpose. If my life had been built on silence, maybe my only way to reclaim it was to break that silence completely. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "It ends with me." But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. It took me 3 days because someone to gather the courage to full story. Helena, and they had every reason I'd called to keep mother it for 39 years. She still lived in the same house, the one with the lavender bushes out front and the heavy oak door that never stopped creaking. I parked outside just as the sun began to set, the light spilling gold over the white paint that had started to peel. Everything looked smaller, older, like it had been waiting for this moment. She didn't hide the fear in her eyes. Her face froze. She said, barely above a whisper, "Can I come in?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she used to feed me soup when I was sick, the same table where I learned to write my name. But tonight, it felt like a courtroom. I placed the 2 birth certificates on the table, then the letter from the hospital, then the photo of her holding the baby. Her hands that trembled wasn't me, as she didn't for touch her rosary any of it. Instead. "I was afraid you'd find out," she said finally. "Afraid or ashamed, both." Her voice was barely there. "Your grandmother made me promise. She said it was the only way to keep the family from falling apart. She told me the truth would destroy everyone." I leaned forward. "So you lied to me for almost 40 years. You called me daughter.
You made
And
me mourn
all
a
of it
brother
for
I
what?
never knew
To
I
protect
had.
a name?
A reputation? She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. You don't understand what it was like back then. Your grandmother, she had made mistakes. She had debts, not just financial moral ones. She owed people favors. She was terrified of scandal, of losing everything your grandfather had built. And Raphael, I asked, was he one of those mistakes?
She told me the
Helena
family
looked down,
that took him
unable
would
to
give
meet
him
my
a better
eyes.
life. Your
But I heard
grandmother made
rumors later
arrangements.
terrible thing. I wanted to find him. I did. But when I tried, she threatened to send me away. She said if I spoke a word, she'd tell everyone the truth about you. My breath caught. She blackmailed you with me. Helena nodded. You were the secret that kept us all in line. The words landed like a physical blow. Helena's lips
stood,
parted,
pacing
but
the
no
room,
sound
and
came.
Jewel,
Then he found
softly,
out your
that's why
grandmother
she
loved
erased
him in her own way. But she believed in order, discipline. She thought punishment was a form of protection. I laughed bitter. She beat the truth out of people and called it love. Helena's tears finally broke. You think I didn't suffer too? You think I didn't want to tell you? Every birthday, every Christmas,
her
I
shoulders
did.
shook.
But
You
she'd
were
look
born
at me because she couldn't
and I'd
bear
remember
the shame
that
of
promise,
another sin.
that damn
she
promise.
made me raise you. She said it would cleanse the family's name. But nothing cleanses a lie. It just stains deeper. For a long time, I said nothing. The clock ticked. Outside, the cicadas screamed. Do you even know who my father was? I finally asked. Helena hesitated, then whispered, yes. My pulse
Your
quickened.
father was the
Who?
same
She
man
took a deep
who
breath,
adopted
eyes
Raphael.
glassy. The room spun. What? She nodded. Double quotes drive. Ferraz. He was involved with your grandmother. He financed the deal. When Raphael was taken, your grandmother promised him something in return. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the table to steady myself. You're saying I was the price? Helena sobbed silently.
That's
You
why
were
there are
supposed
to
to
be
be
given
given
to
to
him
him
too.
That's why
But
she
I
hated
couldn't
me
let it
after
happen.
that. I ran
broke
away
the
with you.
agreement.
Registered
My heart
you under
hammered
my
in my
name.
chest.
Images flashed in my mind, my grandmother's cold eyes, her constant warnings about disobedience, her insistence on family dinners every Sunday. The rituals weren't about unity. They were about control, about ensuring silence. She said if I ever told you, Helena whispered, I couldn't
tell
let
the
them
world
hurt you. You weren't
Maria,
mine.
that
I
you were
stared
born
at her,
of sin.
every part of me torn between rage and something like pity. She had lied to me my entire life. Yes, but to survive inside that house. Maybe lies were the only language she'd ever been allowed to speak. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly. I don't expect you to, she replied. Just don't hate her. She thought she was saving us. The smell of lavender
shook
my
my
head through
No,
the open window.
she was saving
for a
herself.
Moment.
We
thought
sat
I
there
could
in
hear
silence
Grandma
humming
until
from
night
somewhere
in the house. That same low tune she used to sing after dinner. It sent a chill down my spine. Before I left, Helena grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. There's something you need to see, she said. A box under her bed. She made me promise to keep it there.
said it
everything,
was for when the blood
the
came
proof,
knocking,
and her
I
confession.
turned to her.
I drove
What's
back
inside
to the house
her
one
eyes
last time.
darkened. It was almost midnight when I arrived. The air was thick with humidity, and the moonlight made the lavender bushes shimmer silver. The gate creaked open like a sigh. The house felt alive in the dark, as if it knew I was coming for what it had been hiding. Inside, everything smelled of dust and mothballs and faint perfume. I walked down the hallway slowly. Clock still ticked. My footsteps though echoing. No one
Every
had
photo
wound it
on
in
the
years.
wall
Seemed to stare at me. The family smiling at wedding, baptism, birthday, frozen masks of joy on faces built out of lies. Her room was just as she'd left it. The rosary still hung over the bedpost. A glass of holy water stood beside the lamp, evaporated to a thin ring of mineral dust. The crucifix above the bed seemed to watch me too. The edge of the bedspread, and there it was, a small wooden box, dark with age, the brass latch tarnished green. My fingers hesitated before touching it. It felt wrong to open it, like breaking into a tomb. But I had come too far. The latch gave way with a brittle click. Inside were papers, dozens of them, folded letters, receipts, photos, and one thick envelope sealed with red wax with the initial A, the same letter engraved on her wedding ring, Almeida. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter dated August 17th, 1985. Her handwriting was unmistakable, precise, elegant, almost to control. If you are reading this, then the circle has broken. I never meant for it to last this long, but sin multiplies like weeds. You pull one root, I will say, and another grows beneath your feet. And what my daughters were too afraid to repeat. It began in 1980. The drought had destroyed the harvest. The debts were piling up, and your grandfather's company was collapsing. We were days away from losing everything, the land, the house, the name. Then he came, Drive, Ferraz, a man with money and ambition and one weakness. He child have to bear his name. He offered salvation. He erased our debts, but his price was unholy. A legacy. He wanted I said blood. No. God forgive me. I said no. But then Helena came to me, pregnant, and the father had disappeared. Shame was a currency too, and I couldn't afford it. So I made a promise. She would give the child away, and we would survive. That child was Raphael. The paper trembled in my hands. Demanded another child. Reading. When Helena refused to give up the second baby, so I lied again. I thought she told him you had died, and I took the secret to the grave of every man who ever trusted me. But God does not forget. Every Sunday, I felt it, the weight of it, sitting at the table, staring into the faces of the children I had betrayed. The money built this house. The land got the church donation if wing. You ever every find blessing this, we Maria, celebrated came from you. Blood money. Burn what's left. Don't chase the truth. It ruins the living more than it redeems the dead. The letter ended there, but inside the envelope was something else, a small silver locket. I opened it. Inside were two photos, one of a baby I recognized from the hospital bracelet, Raphael, and the other, a tiny newborn girl. Me,
on the back.
The papers
in
slid
faint
from my
ink.
lap,
My debt,
scattering
my
across
redemption.
the carpet
I
like
sank
autumn
to the
leaves.
floor.
The silence was deafening. It wasn't just betrayal. It was inheritance. Every generation had carried a piece of the lie, pretending it was duty, or love, or survival. But it was rot. A rot that had crawled down the bloodline and now lived inside me. I sat there until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. My hands were covered in dust, but I could almost feel her there, not as the woman who had prayed with me, but as the one who had made a deal with the devil and called it family. When I finally stood up, I gathered every letter, every document, every receipt. I took them to the backyard, to the old stone pit where she used to burn dry leaves every autumn. The smell of lavender still lingered in the air. The papers curled and darkened. I then turned to ash. The flame trembled in the wind before catching, small and flickering, like the ghosts finally finding their way out. As the last page burned, her confession, her handwriting dissolving into smoke, I whispered, "It's over." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because truth doesn't die when you burn it. It waits. In blood, in memory, in
every
ashes from the
Sunday
letters that still echoes in that house. Cracks of the morning after like the fire, tiny gray memories. The sky was pale. I stood there and cold, hands raw from the effort, feeling the weight of everything finally pressing down all at once. Every secret, every betrayal, every life that had been traded for the sake of a family name, it all felt like it had landed inside me. I walked through the garden, brushing my fingers along the lavender bushes. I remembered Sundays. The scent was faint now, long, almost meals, ghostly. The whispers behind closed doors, the careful smiles, all those moments of innocence that had been built on silence and fear. And yet, I couldn't hate them all. Not entirely, because each lie, each promise, had been rooted in love, however twisted it was. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had been the scene of so many confessions, at the photos I never knew I was listening to, at the clock that still ticked steadily, indifferent to the lives it had overseen. For the first time, I let myself breathe fully, without the constant weight of secrets pressing down. I thought of Raphael, wherever he was now, alive and unknown. I thought of Jewel, and the way he had returned to me, if only briefly, to hand over and the pieces of my grandmother to understand, and Helena, and how their sin, their sacrifice, their desperate attempts at protection had shaped the woman I had become. I realized that the bloodline, the lies, the deals, they weren't just chains. They were warnings, a map of what happens when fear governs love. And maybe, just maybe, the responsibility now rested with me to break the pattern. The lavender bushes to remember. To live. I left almost the house as if that afternoon, almost as if forgiving. I didn't look back. I drove away slowly, the road stretching ahead like an unbroken ribbon, empty but full of possibility. For days afterward, I wrote. I wrote every letter, every memory, every conversation I'd heard, and every truth I had uncovered.
I didn't intend to publish
On
it.
paper,
I didn't
at
intend
least
to expose
it
anyone.
could breathe
I wrote
without
because the
suffocating
truth
anyone.
had to exist
And in
somewhere.
those pages,
I found a quiet revelation. The past doesn't vanish because you burn its evidence. It lives in the choices you make next. The lies of the past could not touch me anymore, but the lessons, the weight, the shadows they cast would always shape my path. Sunday came again, a week later. I didn't go to the old house. I went to a small cafe in the city, where the sun warmed the glass windows and people laughed loudly, unafraid of secrets. I watched them, strangers who carried their own invisible history, and I realized that life was still happening, and I could still take my place in it, fully aware of everything that had come before. I didn't forgive everyone. I didn't need to, but I forgave myself for being the inheritor of
for
secrets.
being caught in a
I
story
knew that
deep
wasn't
in my
mine to
bones,
control, that I
for
would
being
never
shaped
forget
by
the Sundays at Grandma's house, the prayers, the silence, the fear. But I also knew that my story didn't have to end there. I could choose to live honestly, openly, without hiding. I could carry the past with me, not as a burden, but as a guide. And as I sipped my coffee and watched the sunlight spill
the
across
Sundays
the
would
street,
always
I
echo.
finally
The
felt
ghosts
it,
would
a
always
fragile,
whisper,
but I
trembling
had
peace,
found my voice,
not complete,
and for the
not
first time,
perfect, but
it was
real.
mine. If this story left you stunned, remember, the past always echoes, and the truth is worth seeking even when it hurts. Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this journey moved you, and subscribe so you never miss a story that digs deep beneath the surface. Every secret, every Sunday, every hidden truth, it's all waiting for you in the next video.